Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Prospect Engagement Across a Lengthening Renter's Journey. Before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we just want to take care of really quickly. The hashtag for this webinar is PERQ Insights. So feel free to use that as you post on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and of course, be sure to tag PERQ. We'd love to be part of that conversation. Feel free to ask questions throughout, either in the chat or the Q&A capability. Both of those can be found at the bottom of your Zoom webinar video there. We will attempt to answer all of the questions, but of course, if something doesn't get answered, we will definitely follow up with you afterwards. We want to make sure we get all of those addressed. And then finally, this session is being recorded, and we'll be sure that a link goes out to everyone so that you can either listen again when you have time, or you can share it with your colleagues. Now I would like to introduce our special speaker and special guest. Maribeth Ross is a veteran marketer with decades of experience spent cracking the code on what makes B2C and B2B buyers select and remain loyal to a brand. The former global head of marketing for Monetate. She has deep background in digital experience and how buyers respond, and a passion for creating experiences that give buyers what they need along their journey. A techie at heart, Maribeth has considerable experience with marketing technologies and their evolution across several industries, with her most recent focus on marketing technology for multifamily with her work at PERQ. So welcome, Maribeth. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Lavon, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being a part of our discussion today. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I'm excited to share with you some very, very interesting research findings about today's apartment rental prospects. So the findings that I'm going to share today are based on recent data that came from tens of thousands of consumer interactions with conventional multifamily properties all over the United States. The findings of the research are published in detail in the Q2 2022 issue of the Multifamily Quarterly. We'll be sure to follow up this webinar with a link for you on where you can get a free copy of that report, and it'll have probably some more detail than we're able to cover today in just an hour. I encourage you to ask questions. So I'm here today for you, to get the answers to the questions that you need to be excellent marketers. So as Lavon said, at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A function. You simply click it and type in any questions that you have, and then Lavon will come back at the end of our session. She'll tee those questions up for me. We'll try to get as many of them answered as we possibly can. If we miss some, we'll send out answers to everything to the group so that you guys all get to benefit from that. So please don't be shy with your questions. All right, so let's get rolling here. Of course, sorry about that. So the renter's journey. Well, the renter's journey is a journey. If there's one thing that you should take away from today's discussion, it is this. It is a long journey. It is not like a short trip anymore. It's actually a little bit more like this, and I'm being tongue-in-cheek, but there's more than one way to get there, right? There are tons of places where the renter can fall out of the journey. It takes a while. You get the point. Now, before you go screaming out the door and vacating your job as a marketer, let me explain how I can proclaim with such certainty that this journey is elongated and more complex than it has ever been in the past. So the data that we analyzed showed us that nearly 43% of multifamily rental prospects are visiting a property website multiple times during the renter journey. And this is really important to note because it tells you a lot about the mindset of today's rental shopper. They're browsers. They take more time to be thoughtful and to seek out the information that they want to at their own pace and keep themselves on their own, proceeding on their own journey. And so, in fact, when we looked at this same data set of prospects with multiple websites, we looked at it by property website, and we saw that all of these property websites saw tons of repeat visits happen. Some properties saw the repeat visits as high as 52%. On the other end of the scale, it was 30%. But that's a large chunk of people that are visiting and revisiting property websites. And what we learned when we looked into this data was that on average across our entire data set, these engaged website visitors were converting to known contacts at a rate of about 20% by filling out a form or whatever. And so, as you would expect, the length of journey has a very wide range, right? So the longest journey that we saw in our data set was 194 days between the time a rental prospect first became known to the PMC and when they signed the lease. And that's 6 months. But don't let that scare you, because the average across the entire data set was 46 days. That's not short. And so that gives you some context around what marketing is faced with when it comes to keeping prospects engaged, right? So further bolstering what we learned about the renter's journey is the data that you see here on this slide. So 73% of the rental prospects from this Q2 data set that were tracked in our study self-reported that their planned move-in window was a month or more in the future. Astonishing to me was that a third of them said their move was 3 or more months away. So, sure, a quarter of the prospects were saying, I'm ready, I'm going to move in the next month. I'm ready to move now. But the vast majority of them are not. And this is different than what it used to be even a few years back. And what it means to multifamily marketers is that your community website and all of your marketing touches need to be built to keep these people engaged and active across this longer cycle over an extended period of time, and on different devices, which we're going to get into a little bit later. So in this business, what we used to call looky-loos is now the normal rental prospect. And so we decided to take a look at the website visits a little bit more to see what we could learn there. And specifically, I wanted to know, what was happening during those visits. Is multiple visits an indicator of a better outcome? And we discovered some interesting things. Visitors in general were largely mobile. So 64% of first-time visitors were showing up on a mobile phone. Nearly all the rest happened on desktop. Nobody was using tablets. You probably already knew that one, but what I found particularly interesting was when a visitor has accessed the website multiple times using multiple devices, their lead to tour conversion rate skyrockets to over 74%. And the takeaway here is that their behavior, this access of website across multiple devices, is actually predictive of their propensity to tour and lease. And so as marketers, knowing that is very important. It's important to how we treat the lead, et cetera. So when visitors engage on a website with interactive experiences, rather than just taking in static content, and when I say interactive experiences, I mean things like, an interactive floor plan match widget, or a virtual tour, or some kind of community explorer, or even a chat bot, right? They become more engaged and they spend more time on the website. And that's pretty logical. But the upper left-hand corner of the screen shows you just how much more engagement it gives you. It's almost 3x, right? So that's how much more engaged they are once they start playing around with interactive elements on a website versus when they don't. And, as marketers, obviously we care more about leads than we do time on site, right? So here's the doozy for me was we analyzed visitors that began their journey engaging on the website to those that came from a paid source originally. And what was clear to us was that the website leads were higher quality. And by higher quality, I mean they had a higher lead to lease conversion, which you see in the lower left-hand corner here. They were outpacing the conversion to lease of the external paid leads by more than double. So now you can see that the website's really important to today's modern renter, right? And you might be wondering, well, if they visit and leave, how the heck do I get them back? So we looked at the source of various repeat visits to see how indeed when they did come back, they were getting there. And we learned a lot from the repeat traffic too. What we saw was that often they were being driven by nurture emails and texts that had calls to action that tied back to the interactive experiences on the website. So more than just like, would you like to schedule a tour? It was more about the engagement and the activity with the community brand than it was just moving them to the next step in the buying process, if that makes sense. And so while these return visits don't, by themselves sound all that exciting, it's what happens after the return visit that I think should make all marketers break into a happy dance. So of all the tours that were scheduled over Q2 in this data set, 40% of them were people who had engaged with personalized nurture outreach. So I described earlier that they were receiving emails or texts that had specific calls to action. 40% of the tours were people who had engaged with this kind of stuff from the communities. And so if that doesn't show the power of leveraging nurture outreach against your leads, I don't know what does, right? I should mention that in the case of these successful tours from nurture that I'm talking about, the content they were receiving was custom fit for them individually to ensure its relevance. So it wasn't like an email blast, it was personalized. And so I'm going to talk a lot about personalization in the second half of this session, which is also one of my favorite topics. But let's stay on the journey of a signed lease here. I wanted to give you guys a look at what a typical renter's journey looks like these days, because I'm making a big statement that it's longer and more complicated than ever. And while this is an example of just one, I personally looked at like dozens of them, and they all look like some flavor of this, right? There were themes that carried across all of them. And so this is illustrative of one example, but the themes that I saw was overwhelmingly a renter's journey that ends in a successful lease had some things in common. So one of the things was they were visiting the website several times. I already told you that one. In some cases, they were learning about the community in other places. Commonly, this was the Google business profile. And it was common for them to engage in chat with the leasing assistant, but it wasn't always on the website. Often those chat discussions were triggered out of one of those nurture touches that I told you about. So I think that's an important insight. And if I'm to summarize what I've covered so far as a key takeaway, I'd say this. So, understanding what it takes for to engage your prospects across their renter's journey and using that to your advantage can help keep them interested and give you a competitive edge. Today's renters are spending significant time on websites, more than one time. They're visiting repeatedly. And so the ability to keep them on the website is an important part of maintaining their interest while they're doing their apartment shopping, which is inevitable. They are going to shop because that is today's renter. Further, the ability to capture their contact information, understand their website behaviors, know where they are, looking for additional information on your community, and the ability to store this information and use what you know about them to entice them with further nurture outreach proved to be an effective strategy to cement their interest in your community. And so the fact that the renter's journey is growing in length should inform your marketing approaches. And what that means is think about your retargeting, your re-engagement strategies that you might want to put in place. Think about it as a guide when you're deciding when and where to place ads, send emails, or text message nurture touches. And remember and know that while one renter's journey may be 46 days, another might be 194. So let's dive into the topic of personalization. So I mentioned a few slides ago that one of the things that we saw in the data was that the ability to personalize that nurture outreach was having a positive impact on the conversion rate and to lease. I want to dig into that a little bit more today. So by definition, personalization is what you see up on the screen here. So the esteemed analyst group Gartner defines it this way: as a process that creates a relevant individual interaction between two parties designed to enhance the experience of the recipient. I think that's a bunch of hoo-ha. And so in English, the natural way to say that is that personalization is about tailoring an experience or a communication based on the information that you have learned about an individual. And so why is personalization important today? It is definitely a word that is starting to get thrown around more and more in multifamily, and there is a reason why. So this is some data from McKinsey and Company. So they're a massive consulting firm and analyst house. They're smart folks that do a lot of research on a variety of topics about like consumer buying behavior and stuff like that. And so I read a report, and this data comes from their report. Basically, the story goes a little something like this, right? Personalization matters more than ever because there was a surge in online interactions that happened after the onset of the pandemic, right? And that's no surprise there, right? But because people were interacting more online, it elevated or escalated their expectations from online brand experiences because it gave consumers more exposure to the personalization practices of e-commerce leaders. And that just sort of raised the bar for everyone else, right? And so from web to mobile and even in-person interactions, consumers now view personalization as sort of like the default standard for how a brand should engage with them. And that puts marketers in a tough place because there's a lot involved in the ability to personalize in such a fashion. So here are the proof points, right? So their research shows that 71% of consumers expect companies to deliver them personalized interactions. 76% of them reported they get frustrated when this doesn't happen. That is ratcheting up the pressure on companies to get busy with personalization. Because if consumers don't like the experience they receive, it's easier than ever for them to just go somewhere else. And so these same folks, when they were interviewed, said something like, 3/4 of them said, I stopped working with this brand and went to another brand because I didn't like how they were engaging me. I wasn't getting what I needed, right? So I think that's interesting stuff, right? But really, more than that is this last bullet on the left-hand side. Personalization drives performance, and it drives better customer outcomes. The customer outcomes is what drives the performance. So companies that perform better and are growing faster, outpacing their peers in growth, 40% more of their revenue was coming from personalization efforts than companies that weren't growth leaders, right? And so they're more mature around personalization, and as a result, they're performing better as a business. On the right-hand side, this is actually an image from the McKinsey report, and I circled here the stuff that I think is most interesting and relevant to us in multifamily. Let's have a look at that. So the first thing is 75% of people said, make it easier for me to navigate a website. And things like dynamic navigation or recommended next steps they should take on a website, or even nurture recommendations about them coming back to the site, is the kinds of things that will help them feel like this is satisfied. And so that makes perfect sense when you reflect on what I said a few slides ago, where people were coming back to the website from nurture emails and nurture text messages that were recommending a specific experience, like online interactive experience for them. That's the answer to this. The second thing, about 2/3 of folks say they want messaging and promotions that are tailored to them specifically. These things make a lot of sense for multifamily, right? Like if you know their preferred amenities on floor plans, there's a lot that you can do to tailor those things in your communications with them, not just email outreach or SMS nurture, but even face-to-face when you meet them in person. The last one is about triggers, right? They actually want to be reminded. And I found that super interesting. I've been a long time marketer, and that didn't always used to be the case, right? So more than half the folks here said, I want outreach that's triggered to me based off my behavior, things like a website visit. So of course, I became curious because that's my nature, and I started to dig in a little bit more on the impact of that personalization that I spoke of to this multifamily prospect data set. And so here's what I found. So first, let's level set on how I defined personalization, right? Because I think that term means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. The personalized touches that we were able to explore with our data set were marketing emails and marketing text messages that offered dynamic calls to action. So the calls to action for them to come back to the website were changed for each person. It was individualized to them based on what they had done previously on the website. Or it sent them to content on the website that was specific to something that was known about them, like they, liked the 2-bedroom floor plan, and it sends them back to that, for example. Also based off of data captured from website engagement. The email and text messages did things like referenced content, like the content that was actually in the message might have been tweaked based on what they knew too. Like in cases where the preferred floor plan was known, it might have been referenced somehow in the message. Or like I said, if there's a widget that is relevant to what is known about the prospect, they get pointed to that thing. The timing of the messages were also adapted based on the move-in timeframes of the individuals. So those people, putting in the context of what we've been talking about, people with a longer renter's journey, a self-reported renter's journey, might get them spaced out further from one another and get more of them over time than somebody who's looking to move more quickly, who would get the emails closer together. And in some of the cases, if the individual was showing a preference for email over SMS or vice versa, the channel was adjusted to send in their channel of preference. And so, the headline here, guys, is that use of these tactics in the nurture communications had a really, really profound impact. And so rental prospects that had engaged with this kind of outreach that I described were over 4 times more likely to book a tour. But I don't want to downplay the need for swift response with these, today's rental prospects, because they definitely have this need for like immediate gratification. So the ability to converse with them along the middle of their renter's journey appeared to have a lot of impact as well. And so we looked at the data set and rental prospects that had engaged in chat conversations or asked questions of a property website via chat with an SMS bot or an email bot or the website chat, right? Rental, the results there, pretty definitive. Rental prospects that engaged with automated conversations converted to a tour, this is the image on the right-hand side, at a rate of 36% versus those who hadn't engaged in conversation converted to a tour at a rate of 16%. So what really stood out to me was that the prospects weren't necessarily engaging with the chatbot on the first website visit, because I was looking across these like whole renter journeys, right? And more often they were conversing in other channels and they were doing it well into their renting journey. And they were prompted by the marketing nurture touch. And so the key takeaway for me is this, that in multifamily, this personalized nurture approach and this chat across channels approach is a really, really powerful combination. And it made me even more curious, right? If personalization really does help with engagement, what does it do for generating leases? How many times does a community need to send a nurture outreach in order to get someone to book a tour or sign a lease? And how does that vary over these longer renters' journeys? And so you'll have to humor me a little bit as I reference the Discovery Channel show Mythbusters, because I'm a nerd and, I can't lie. But so it's been long understood in multifamily that, you only follow up so many times and if somebody doesn't book a tour, you dead the lead. Many communities only follow up on known contacts like 2-3 times and move on to warmer leads. And, we all know that on-site teams will tend to gravitate to the warmer stuff. 3 seems to be a common number that I've heard in multifamily for the number of times before deading the lead. This myth busted. Well, it seems like it makes intuitive sense to have our overworked on-site teams dead a lead and not work on something that's aging, right, after they've reached out a few times. The data set actually showed that this practice is leaving behind a lot of viable leads. When we looked at the personalized nurture approaches, we dug into, how many of those does it take for somebody to convert from a lead to a tour? And like I said, that the data busted that myth and allowed me to have this humorous little Mythbusters reference. So here's the data, right? Well, the personalized outreach was successful at driving a tour from the first nurture touch about 56% of the time. An astounding 32% of the booked tours came from prospects who had had 3 or more nurture touches. And so if that isn't enough really to convince you that rental prospects like to take their sweet time, more than 8% of tours booked had received 6 or more personalized touches. And so, think about it in this context. If a community had stopped at 2 or even 3 touches, they would have had 1/3 less tours to schedule. And imagine the impact that that has on leases signed, right? So basically, they would have had considerably less tours. They would have needed more leads and spent more time and more money working those leads to try to get them to tours, all to get the same outcome rather than working harder on the leads that they had, right? And so this, for me, illustrates how broad reaching the impact of how you manage your leads is on time, money, and ultimately occupancy. So here's a key takeaway, because I like to summarize for you guys periodically, right? The data proves that personalized nurture outreach drives substantially better leasing outcomes, and it needs to be sustained for longer than a couple touches, and it needs to be dynamic and adjust to today's apartment shoppers' increasing renters' journey length. The failure to properly nurture these leads for the length of their renter's journey is leaving proverbial money on the table and not converting a high percentage of paid leads that would have converted had people stuck with them. That's an important takeaway. So here's some other stuff I really wanted to share. So the smart people at McKinsey, which is a very large consulting firm, built a model on, what does it take for a company to be good at personalization? And they built this model, and I'm going to summarize it for you more simply than all this stuff that's on the screen. But basically, what they said was, companies that do personalization well, they use the data and they use the analytics to identify opportunities to do this. They know more about their prospects because of this. They invest in AI-driven decisioning capabilities so that they can respond to customer signals in real time, because today's buyers are instant gratification focused, and automation helps ease the burden of managing all those leads, right? They also establish robust measurement processes so that they can track all this. They know what's working, they know what's not. They invest in fit for purpose marketing automation technology, and they become very data focused. So instead of trying to Frankenstein together a solution to the problem, they find technology that does exactly what it is that they need. They create teams and collaboration that cuts across marketing, analytics, and technology. So they make sure all these people are sort of talking to each other, because all of these groups have a vested interest in the topic of personalization. And they recognize that getting good at personalization sometimes means, testing and learning along the way. And they invest in the right talent and the training to make sure that folks know how to do personalization and that the program continues to advance. So that's real high level stuff. So I wanted to make things a little more actionable for you. And so hence the following few slides. So here's what we learned, right? So for marketers to be able to personalize communications, they need to become experts at collecting and using data. The more you know about the prospect, obviously, the more you can personalize to them. But that data needs to be captured somewhere. It needs to be stored somewhere digitally, and it needs to be accessible so that a marketer can, put that to good use. So what kind of data is the important question, right? So when we looked at the data that had been collected on the rental prospects in this Q2 data set that we used for this study, we found that the communities that were marketing to them had collected quite a bit of information. So on average, each prospect had over 12 data points associated with their contact account that had been used to personalize their renter's journey. And it really fell across three categories of information. So the first is like your basic information, like name, email, and phone number, right? That's how you contact the person, right? But the second category was more detailed lead information. It was things like move-in time frame, preferred bedroom or bathroom counts, whether they need a pet-friendly property or not, their budget, amenities they like, things like that, you know, in the world of marketing is referred to as first person data. It's like self-reported information, right? So the communities had to gather this information from their prospect engagement. The third category that was leveraged was metadata. So the metadata is the stuff that your marketing systems store and observe themselves, right? Things like website conversion sources, things that tell about behaviors, what devices they use, and you know, how long their sessions were. And it's this kind of stuff that was used to tailor the kind of outreach that was sent and what was sent to them, right? Because again, if you know their preferred channel, you can tailor it that way. If you know their preferred amenities from a community, you can talk about those things more in the actual content that you send. If you understand when they plan to move, you understand roughly the length of their renter's journey, and you can tailor the cadence by which you reach out to these people to their renter's journey, no matter what it is. So, like I said, to enable the kind of personalized nurturing that was being used in this particular data set and covered by this report, multifamily marketers need to consider how you're going to collect this data if you're not already doing it, where you're going to store this data, and how you're going to access this data. Specifically, the data needs to be easily queried to enable sending the right message to the right people at the right time. So I wanted to drill in a little bit more on the topic of personalization. I know we had our Gartner definition and I redefined that in actual English for you, but here's a table of some examples of personalization that can be effective. Certainly a lot more is possible when it comes to personalization if you have the right technology, right? And so this chart is really meant to illustrate for you the connection between data and what's possible. So I'll run through it quick. There's the obvious one, right? If you know their first name, you can use their first name in your nurture outreach as a salutation at the beginning of that contact. That's something that most folks can do manually in your email marketing. Either put it in manually in a communication, or your email marketing system might be able to draw it in from a database or something and automate that. But remember, like, simply putting their first name at the beginning of an email is not what consumers are asking for. They're asking for communications that are tailored to them, offers that are specific to them, next best action recommendations for the website. So sadly, just being able to personalize around their name just isn't enough, right? And so, but next thing down, if you know their move-in window, you can use it to create urgency in the copy of your nurture outreach. You can also tailor, like I said on the last slide, the length of the time that you outreach to them. Pet preferences, you could use that to either, you know, send them information about how your community supports pets, or maybe you change the subject line of an email to say, "We love pets too," or something like that, but you're tailoring the message more to what you understand about their preferences. The next one down, similar, preferred floor plan. You can use that to send them a reminder of the floor plan that they, you know, loved. And website activity. This was the doozy. So if you'll remember, what we heard was in that data set that I referenced from the McKinsey study was that they want recommendations on actions to take. They want to be prompted back to the site. They want triggers to happen based on their behavior. So the ability to use website activity to determine the next best step for them to take along their renter's journey is like a big deal. So that's a lot to cover, right? And I know we've had some questions come in because I can see them on the top of my screen here. So I'd like to try to answer as many as I can in the amount of time that we have left. I also want to remind you again how to submit your questions. So if you do want to submit a question, use the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. So if you hover over there, a little menu will pop up. You click on it, type in your question, hit send, and it'll show up in the queue so that the team can queue that up for me. So back to Lavon so that she can manage all these questions for me.
Yes, thank you so much, Maribeth. That was so fascinating just to hear more about how personalization and nurture can impact that elongated renter's journey. So thank you so much for that insight. Yes, so here we go. Let's dive in. Thank you all so much for submitting some really great questions. We appreciate it. So let's get started. Let's see. One of the ones that came in was asking, how can we track a prospect's journey on the website?
So it depends on the technology environment that you have. But oftentimes there are technologies that know the interactions that happen between a prospect and a website. And obviously this is a thought leadership session. This is not, this isn't a sales pitch, but PERQ, for example, is a technology that does that kind of stuff. So if that is something that you want to do, it's definitely an area that you should look into, is technologies that help you do that.
Yeah, that's great. And then one of the next ones was asking your recommendation around what's more important. Is it more important to have automated chat capabilities or nurture capabilities?
So that's a good question. I don't actually, I don't think it's an either or proposition. I really don't. This data set, the one thing that it showed was people engage with chat and people engage with nurture. But when you put the two together, you get way better results. So the conversion rates skyrocketed. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head when people had both of those things available to them and engaged with those things. So if I had my druthers as a multifamily marketer, I would make sure that I have both of those things.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The more you can interact with people, the better, I think. And then an additional one was asking about their CRM. So they know that they have some of this helpful lead data within their CRM, but they're asking how do they get that data out to be able to personalize like you're recommending?
Yeah, so there are a number of different ways, right? So there are technologies that can do some personalization stuff. And again, not a sales pitch, but PERQ has some of those capabilities. Another way that you can do that is manually. So you query the data out, you pull it out in a Excel spreadsheet, more or less, and you create segments. So you segment around whatever the data points are, and then you batch your communications to those segments that you create. It's, you know, it's time consuming, but as we've seen here, it's a valuable exercise because it pays off in conversions big time.
Yeah. And then speaking of conversions, someone was asking, how can I know how my ILS conversion compares to my website leads?
Yeah. So attribution is a huge thing, right? And it's difficult for marketers often to be able to track their attribution. There are technologies that help do this, and the marketers that I see that are most successful have the ability to track their originating lead source attribution all the way across the renter's journey. So it would be a data point from the point of first conversion that would carry as that data travels through your system. So if that's not a capability that you have today, whoever asked that question, it's definitely something that you should investigate, and it's called lead source attribution.
Awesome. Well, I think that takes us through all of the questions. So just one last little bit here. As promised, we will absolutely follow up with the recording for this, and we'll make sure that you have the latest version of the full report that was mentioned here, the Q2 multifamily quarterly. We'll make sure that's out as well. And ultimately, we hope you found this information helpful. We'd love to keep in touch. You can always follow our social channels. That's going to show you the latest information that we have available. And then just if you want to follow up with Maribeth specifically, I'm sure she'd love to hear from you. Her contact information is listed here, whether on LinkedIn or email. And then, of course, if you're interested in learning more about how PERQ helps multifamily PMCs automate and personalize the renter's journey, we'd love to share more about that. So please feel free to check us out at PERQ.com. Thank you so much, and we appreciate you joining us today.